Hello everyone and welcome to the first of at least 7 videos. The last video from last week was an introduction to your journey to accreditation. This video is the standard 1, and what we will be doing is we will be going through each of the standards 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We'll look at evidences. And we'll look at some samples. I've got some samples I'll share from my accreditation report and to give you a bit of an understanding of what you need to do. If you guys have annotations or evidence to share, that's great. If you don't, that's okay. I'll just be presenting my stuff and then answering your questions as we go along. I am just going to change something here for a second. Share screen. There we go. Can everyone see the PowerPoint that I've just put up? If I can just yes. Okay. Thank you very much. All right. So, all right. So standard 1, we all know how the standards are basically structured. They're basically an overarching goal, and then they're broken down into descriptors. This is what we're going to be doing today. So today we're just going to do a review of standard 1. We're going to talk about the type of evidences you can use. We're going to talk about some strategies that you have for, that you can employ to collect the evidence. We're going to look at an evidence example, mine, and I'll walk you through what I did and how I achieved it. We're going to talk about annotation. So then we can talk about how to actually write your annotation, what your annotation should look like. And then I'll show you my annotation example that I wrote, and then we'll do a general question and answer session at the end. Okay. Now, for the majority of us, we hear about the standards quite a lot in university. It's almost, drummed into our head from the get-go. Got to know the national standards, got to know the national standards. When we become teachers, the national standards for teaching seems to kind of go into the background a little bit as we start focusing more on the job and less on the descriptors or the technical knowledge that we're trying to impart to our students. But it is still a function of our teaching role, and we need to understand it, and we need to understand what the goals are for everything in the standards. So standard 1 is to know the students and how they learn. When you're going about doing your standards, it's important to note that the simplest reading of a standard is often the right one. So let me just 1 second. I've just got one more person in joining our session. Anyway, the simplest reading of a standard is often the right one. Okay, know students and how they learn. If you think about it, that's our core job. We should know our students. We should know what our students are trying to achieve, or what the goal is to achieve. And then what we need to do is just basically build off from that. So I'll just do a very quick read through of the descriptors so we're all on the same page. Descriptor 1.1.2, using teaching strategies based on knowledge or students' physical, social, and intellectual development and characteristics to improve learning outcomes. Now, when we say based on knowledge, we're talking about your knowledge. Okay, so that means that you're able to demonstrate that you have been able to employ either a creative or a tried and tested teaching method in order to be able to meet the needs of the student. 1.1.2, structured teaching program using research and legal advice about how students learn. We do not teach in a vacuum. It can sometimes feel like that. It can sometimes feel that when you're standing in front of 20 to 30 kids, that it can feel like you're in this on your own. But our profession is uniquely collaborative. So anything that you can do that can show that, okay, look, I didn't understand this, or I didn't have any information about this. You went to your supervisor or a head teacher or another colleague, and you were forwarded on to do some research or something to look into, with the ultimate goal of benefiting you as a teacher, but to improve how the students are going to learn. Standard 1.3.2, design and implement teaching strategies that are responsive to the learning strengths and the needs of students. Sorry, we just have another person joining us. One moment. Design and, welcome to the new people. I've got the chat window here if you want to ask any questions. Design and implement teaching strategies that are responsive to the learning strengths and the needs of students from diverse linguistic, cultural, religious, and socioeconomic backgrounds. This is a very broad scope, this descriptor, because this means that it can be a catch-all for anything that you really want to do. This doesn't need to be too much. You don't need to create or find evidence where this is the sole factor. This can be something that you can put in as part of a whole. Okay, so depending on where you are, depending on what you're aiming to achieve that day, you can be able to either include that as part of your evidence, or you can include it as a part of your annotation. Okay. The next one is, sorry, I'm getting a lot of people coming in. All right, the next one is 1.4.2, which is design and implement effective teaching strategies. Sorry, having technical issues on my side here. Strategies that are responsive to the local community and cultural setting, linguistic background, and history of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. You can address this a lot in your annotations. Okay, you don't necessarily have to do, say, a lesson plan or a program or something where you are, dedicating an enormous amount of time to meeting this one specific descriptor. What you can do is you can say, okay, this is going to be addressed as part of a whole thing. Whether that you address it with history, whether you address it with literature, whether you address it with dance, however way you go about it, you just simply say that this is going to be included as part of the whole holistic view of your program or your lesson or the school's plan and ambition to address local communities, cultural settings, languages, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander students. 1.5.2, develop teaching activities that incorporate differentiated strategies to meet specific learning needs of students across a full range of abilities. Now, for a lot of us, we have probably mixed ability students, where you'll have some students that are low ability, mid ability, high ability. You're going to have students that will have independent learning plans that have been put in place. You're going to have students that are going to have behavioral issues that may come up that need to be addressed. You may have students that have disability. You may have students that struggle to engage with the content. 1.5.2 allows you to be able to talk about and express how you have come up with a teaching strategy to address that student. Now, sometimes that might mean that you've only got one or two students out of a whole class that may need that differentiated strategy. But if you're able to demonstrate and you are able to show, this is what I did, this is how I differentiated, so then everybody could meet the same learning outcome, that will be a huge advantage, and that will actually carry across quite a lot of the standards. 1.6.2, design and implement teaching activities that support the participation and learning of students with disability and address relevant policy and legislative requirements. Don't get too caught up about the policy and legislative requirements and go, I didn't know I suddenly had to quote law or something like that. That's not what it's asking you to do. What it's asking you to do is that you are making your lessons, or that you can demonstrate that your lessons are equally accessible to every student in that classroom. As casual teachers, that might be a bit harder because you may not have developed that rapport with students. With short-term teachers and temporary teachers, you have a little bit of more leeway because you will understand or know who the students are and what disabilities they might have. The best way to think of it is when you're thinking of all of the standards, you're basically going, how do I get it so then everybody in this classroom meets the same learning outcome, and how do I find evidence to show that? Okay. With a lot of the descriptors, one of the things that people get caught up in is they go, unless I have a piece of evidence that specifically ticks this off, that even a lay person on the street would be able to look at it and say, yeah, that matches, the evidence doesn't work. That's not the case. Most of what people tend to forget about the Proficient report is that this is actually going to be mostly read and edited or adjusted, or the conversations that you're going to have about this is going to be with your supervisor, whether that's a head teacher or a supervisor assigned to you by the school. They're going to be pretty forgiving. They're teachers too. They're going to understand that not all the evidence is going to be specific, or that unless you have this one specific line or one specific piece, that evidence is going to get a big cross and it's going to get chucked out. The evidence is meant to be that you are able to say, with a piece of evidence and the annotations, this is what I did, this is how it helped the students. And your supervisors, again, are going to understand the standards themselves, but they're also going to know that the standards allow a lot of wiggle room. And every supervisor that I've spoken to have all kind of said the same thing. The descriptors are important, especially when you're writing your annotations, but they are not like written in stone. If you don't have this one thing, it's gone. That's it. You have to start from scratch. The other thing that you have to remember about this is that you do not have to meet all the descriptors. This is the mistake that a lot of people make. They think, oh no, I need to go through every single descriptor and I need to mark every single descriptor. Otherwise, my evidence or my annotation they're not going to be accepted. This is not the case at all. The way it works is you have two ways that you can go about writing your report. Option one, you do the evidences as I did, where you just pick a piece of evidence, you pick descriptors from a standard, and then you leave it be, okay? Another way you can do it is you can put a piece of evidence and you can pick several descriptors from several different standards. You can do either way. I personally did it with one-to-one, so one piece of evidence to one standard. And the reason why I did that is because it simplified the system for me. I didn't want to read through, pages and pages and pages of descriptors trying to figure out which one I need to tick. I just simply went, right, standard one, evidence one, descriptors from evidence one, and then we're done. Is everyone following so far? I'll just have a sneaky glass of water. I'm watching the chat to see if anybody's going to respond. Good. If only my students could respond as fast. Okay, moving on. Now, this is where we get to talk about evidence, okay? I always like talking about evidence as if I'm a detective, and in a lot of ways, that's what it ends up being. Now, whether you are a day-to-day, short-term, or a long-term employee with the school, or whether you're even permanent, the same amount of evidence applies to all of you, okay? But it's important to remember this. You only need one piece of evidence, okay? The way it works is the minimum amount of evidences that you can supply is 5. The maximum amount of evidences you can supply is 7. What a lot of people tend to do is they tend to think, oh no, I've got to find one piece of evidence that can be used for each descriptor. You can do that. Otherwise, what you can do with some evidences is you can actually multi-purpose them, okay? A lesson plan is arguably the best piece of evidence for standard 1. The good thing about the lesson plan is that if you play your cards right, you can actually use the lesson plan in conjunction with your observation by your supervisor. And that means that you can knock out, you can free 2 birds with 1 key. You can simply say, right, got my lesson plan, I've created it, I've put in all these components, and I'm going to use the same lesson plan for my observation, and your observation can be on different standards as well. And then you've managed to accomplish 2 pieces of evidence with 1 bit of work. So going through the evidences, lesson plans are the best ones for standard 1. Annotated conversations, log notes, or meeting agendas with specific teachers. So if you have teachers for like an inherent hearing teacher, or you have a teacher that has a specialist knowledge for student well-being, you can log those conversations down. Lesson observation reports, reflection on individual learning plans. Now, just a note about individual learning plans. Individual learning plans tend to have a lot of identifying factors about your students. If you decide that you are going to do, or you are going to use an individual learning plan as part of your knowing the students and how they learn, you will need to remove identifying factors of that student. That means you need to remove their name. You will need to remove any other teachers that would be involved in that plan. But what you can do is you can take an individual learning plan or several individual learning plans and then write lesson plans or write notes for yourself or do further research about their particular needs. So then you can demonstrate that you know your students from an ILP and then that you are accounting for it in your planning. You can use data or analysis of teaching strategy successes. This is really good in particular with web-based programs. So if you're a math teacher or a science teacher, you might know about Mathletics or, and I forget what the science one, but there are websites where students can be assessed on their knowledge. You can use data if you want to be able to say, look, my students were struggling with understanding this. I decided to employ this strategy. I use ICT, so technology, and I was able to track the progress in, as well as my teaching strategies. So that can easily be used. I think I wrote reflections on individual learning plans twice. Sorry about that. You can provide a unit of work. That's pretty self-explanatory. You don't need to load up the entire unit of work. You can just simply have the scope, and then in the annotations, you can write about, what you would plan to do over the X amount of weeks. You can annotate planning documents referencing professional reading. This is really useful. So what this means is that, let's say that you are teaching a subject you don't know, or you are teaching the subject you're familiar with, but there are new professional readings about it. What you can do is you can, have a lesson plan or something, and then you can annotate it and say, oh, but, referencing this, doing that, updating, showing a piece of evidence where you are reflecting your professional reading into the work you are doing. You can have lesson plans showing differentiated strategies. So that's where you're doing audio, visual, spatial, any other strategy where you're going, I'm going to have certain students do X, I'm going to have certain students do Y, but they're going to get the same learning outcome. Yeah. Now, oh, sorry, I should go back there. Are there any questions about the evidences or the types of evidences that you can use? Just watching the chat, having a glass of water. All right, I've got no questions, so I'm presuming that everyone's pretty happy with that so far. How do you log conversation logs? Was a question asked by Maria. So the best way to do it is if you have a teacher's diary and you schedule an appointment, or you schedule a time to sit down with your supervisor, or you schedule to sit down with a teacher. And then you just say, look, is it all right if I can take some notes about this? Just so then for my own review. Or otherwise, what you can do is just to simply take notes. And then what you can do is you can email the person later on, and you can say, hi, such and such, just following up on the conversation that we had today. And then you just write all the notes that you had, and that correspondence can count as evidence. Okay. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to have something where you are just making a note of some of the conversations that you're having. Again, this is only if you find that this evidence is something that you might want to present as part of your overall evidence. Generally, I find that meeting agendas are usually the best, because someone writes up in a meeting agenda and then you can just get a pen and just write over it and just say, this is what we spoke about, or, a reference to professional reading. I need to follow up on that. And then, yeah, you pretty much got a piece of evidence for it, that you can use. Does that make sense, Maria? Yes. So what you would do is you would say to your supervisor, hey, listen, I have some students I want to talk about. I'd like to actually make a meeting, annotate our conversations and email it back to you later. This is actually going to be as part of my my Proficient report. Are you okay with that? I don't see a supervisor saying no to that. And even then, even if it ends up being half an hour, it's always good to have a record. Again, that's only if you're going to do the meeting logs. Otherwise, you can do the lesson plan, and same. All right. So Maria, just let me know when you're all good, and then I'll move on to the next slide. Okay, good. All right, without any more questions, I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, there's some more evidence that you can use. So I've spoken with Maria about meeting logs with supervisors. You can develop a plan involving cultural, sensitive, and ELD components. Now, what that means is that you might have students that might have cultural sensitivity, or they might have a sensitivity due to trauma or due to some kind of behavioral issue that has yet to be addressed, or that does not have an ILP arranged yet. Or you might have students that have difficulty with English as a second language. You can make a plan specific to that, where you are saying, even though I have a lesson plan, I'm going to make a plan specifically for this student to be able to demonstrate that I really want this student, that this is what I understand about the student, and this is how I'm going to get them to learn. So that's something useful to make. You could also do a demonstrated use of resources. So you might have a PowerPoint that you make. You might have some music or some songs that you might want to use. You might have a lesson that's all about being aware of your, the space around you. So that could be a PE lesson, that could be a dance lesson. But what you're doing is you're able to demonstrate that you're able to use other resources to help you achieve a learning goal. Lesson observation notes can be used for standard 1, however, it's not recommended because that's usually submitted as a different piece of evidence in your report. However, if you make a lesson plan, you can say to your supervisor, I've made a lesson plan, can you observe me on it? And then you can knock it out in one go. You can also include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander inclusive practices. So that's where you have actually gone out and engaged with Aboriginal communities or elders in your area, and that you are finding ways to include that knowledge into your lessons. You can do annotated learning tasks such as worksheets. However, I'm not saying that you should reinvent the wheel and make your own worksheets, but I am saying that unless you can tie your specific lesson into that worksheet to demonstrate a learning outcome, it's always best to just kind of make sure that you're choosing worksheets that are differentiated. So then you're saying, look, we have the same learning outcome, but I did 3 worksheets, one for the low ability, one for the mixed ability, one for the high ability. You would count those 3 pieces of paper as one evidence. So then when you're writing about it, you can say, this is how I can demonstrate that I know my students because I differentiated the task. Same worksheet, differentiated in 3 ways, same outcome. Differentiate learning strategies with the same learning objective. If you can find ways that can demonstrate that, fantastic. And anything that you have that could be including disability inclusive practices. So that's ILPs, meeting with parents or with specialists. So as you can see, there's quite a range of evidences that you can choose from. My suggestion to you is that the easiest one of a lot of these is a lesson plan. Because A, we all know how to make a lesson plan. B, lesson plans are customizable, meaning that we can write them our own way. And C, lesson plans, if you write it and use it, and that means it's going to be yours forever. So that means you can use that lesson plan yourself, or you can never look at it again. But either way, you've made it. For evidence one, standard one, I found that the lesson plan was the easiest one that knocked out as many of the standards as we could. When it comes to evidences, okay, you need to be strategic about it. So this is not something that you can just, wave your hand in the air and go, oh no, I don't have this piece of evidence. I need to just, scramble for 2 hours and look through a hard drive that if hard drives could have dust, I'm sure they would, to find this thing straight away. You need to be proactive. You need to sit down and you need to kind of map out what kind of evidences you think you might be able to get for this standard. Some of the things that you should be thinking about is to look to the work that you've done, okay? It has to be your own work, or it can be in a collaboration with a colleague. There's a good likely chance that you have all written a lesson plan, okay? Right there, that's a piece of evidence, okay? If you've written a unit of work and you've employed it at a school, that's a piece of evidence, okay? If you've written a program, if you've got annotations or any of the other evidence I've spoken about, if it's there, you've got it. Now, if you haven't got it, if you haven't got a lesson plan, make one, okay? And then implement it or use it at the earliest convenience. So if you're a casual teacher or you're on a short block and you're like, I haven't got a lesson plan, I can make a lesson plan, I have no idea how I can use it. What I suggest you do is speak to your head teacher of admin or the person who books you at the school, and you say, look, I'm trying to do my accreditation. I've spoken with some people at the school where, I've got a supervisor or the teacher or the assistant, a teacher, the assistant principal, or the principal is aware of it. I need to create some evidence to demonstrate my learning. I would like to write a lesson plan and actually conduct a lesson for the next person that I cover. The head teacher or the person who books you will likely go, okay, let me help you with that. And then they would tell you which teacher that you're going to cover, maybe 24 or 48 hours, or maybe at some time down the road, okay? As soon as you get that option, what you do is you contact that teacher and you say, look, how do you feel about me writing a lesson plan? Tell me what the learning objectives you originally had. Let me do the lesson plan. Whether that's, I'll write the lesson plan, I'll find the resources, I'll find the worksheets, or I'll find work from the textbook or whatever it is. You are going to be hard pressed to find a teacher that's going to say no to that, because that means there's one less class that they have to prepare for. So if you can, what you can do is you can say, right, I have a lesson plan, I'm going to use it, and then after that lesson plan, I'm going to annotate it myself. What worked, what didn't, what can improve. And that's the easiest way to go about creating a piece of evidence for standard 1. If you're lucky and you have a school that's working with you and it's like, you know, we're going to help you, we're going to assign you a supervisor, we're going to observe you. What you do is you work it out and you go, okay, look, I have a lesson plan. I'm going to get the observation and lesson plan done at the same time. This creates a way for your supervisor to not only see your lesson plan, observe you as a teacher and see whether you actually, you know, made your lesson plan work, what went right, what went wrong, areas for improvement. And that's the easiest way to go about it. Because then if you do that, when it comes to uploading the evidence, you can use the lesson plan for standard 1. And then if you're missing a standard, it's likely that you covered it in the observation. Food for thought. Yeah, so if you're booked at a school in advance, speak with the teacher you're covering and offer them to do a lesson plan. It doesn't have to be in your area of expertise. So for instance, if you're math trained and you've been put into English, you can still use that as evidence. If you're music trained and you're put into science, same thing applies, okay? The supervisor that you will have will tell you whether the evidence that you have is insufficient or not, okay? NESA has very little say over what evidence is accepted or not. So if you go to your supervisor and you say, look, I'm a casual, or I'm doing short blocks, I don't have a whole lot of time, I don't have a whole lot of consistency, I am going to be teaching outside of my KLA. Are you okay with that? And they will be, because they will understand what it's like. Any questions so far? Can you use your PDP? Yes and no, not for standard 1, I would say. You could use your PDP, I think, probably for standard 7, because standard 7 is a little bit more about following department policy guidelines and legislative policies and procedures. I would say that your PDP would, how would I do this? What I would do with your PDP is I would try and hold it for standard 7 at this point. Have a look at the standards of standard 7 and see how you go with that. Okay. I'll have to look into that one. I don't think I've ever seen a PDP used in a report, but I could be wrong, but I'll follow that up and I'll let you know. Is that okay, Chloe? You have signed lesson plans from PDP, great. So if you've got a signed lesson plan, then that's fine, put it up, okay? So that's not a problem at all, okay? Any evidence that you've got, generally, so long as you can match it to whatever standard is in the descriptors that you're trying to do, that's fine. If there's a signed lesson plan, go for it. Is that okay, Chloe? Okay, Chloe said yes. I'm going to move on. Okay, so now let me just see. Okay, I'm going to show you a piece of evidence that I had. So Chloe's just asking, with meeting standards goal 4.32, 6.12, and 7.42 for the PDP. Yeah, you can use that. So if you want to use that across a broad range of descriptors, that's perfectly fine. And that's 3 descriptors. That's more than enough. Okay, so you can put that as your evidence, whatever number, and then just tick those boxes, and then you would have met that evidence and outcome. Okay, I'm just going to stop sharing that screen, and I am now going to share another screen in a second as soon as I pull it up. Here it is. Okay, can everyone see that lesson plan that I've just put up? Okay, thank you, Lena. Thank you, Maria. Okay, so this is the first piece of evidence that I put up. Note, however, that I actually wrote all of this in Word first before I uploaded it to ETAMS. So that's why it's got the appendix Year 7 lesson plan up there. So this was a lesson plan that I made for an introduction to Minecraft. I teach Minecraft at Minecraft Education Coding at Asheville Boys. So with the lesson plan, I sat down with my teacher and my supervisor, and I said, look, this is my lesson plan. This is what I plan to do in the class. Have a look. What do you think? And he was very happy with this. I was able to show, the unit title, lesson title, content strands, what class it was, how long the class was, really basic information, okay? I had aim, resources, and prior knowledge all set up. I spoke about the outcomes from the syllabus, what my 3 goals were for that lesson, and what the students should be able to learn by the end of it, okay? Basic structure of a lesson plan, I did an introduction, I had my body, and then I had my conclusion. Now you would note here that there are a whole bunch of arrows that are all over the shop, okay? What I discovered is when you upload your evidence, you don't necessarily have to annotate your evidence. Okay, the annotations is all that matters. The evidence, you simply need to be able to say that the annotations should be able to be clearly pointing out what your evidence had. I had a very horrible afternoon where I was spending probably 3-4 hours with Microsoft Word trying to get that text box 1.5.2 to stay where it was instead of moving everything around. It drove me nuts. You do not have to annotate your evidence. You just write your annotations, okay? The reason why I'm making this very, very clear is I'm trying to save you guys time, okay? Don't do anything fancy with your evidence. You just simply put it up. Now, with the lesson plan that I put up, you'll notice that there's no writing. I didn't write over or anything like that. I did the lesson plan. I wrote my notes on it. I was really proud of it, and I put it on my desk, and I'm like, fantastic, this thing's going to be used for evidence. I'm going to scan this in a couple of minutes. I went out the room, and then somehow that few minutes turned into a couple of hours. And then when I got back, I completely forgot about it, shoved it somewhere, and then lost it forever. So help yourselves. Whatever evidence you're using at school, get yourself a folder and just make a habit of putting your evidences in one spot. So I ended up having this on my PC, and I just simply loaded it up, and my supervisor accepted it because he was like, I saw your annotations beforehand. And then of course, after I submit the report, I find it like the next day. And I'm like, really? That had to happen? Anyway, basic lesson plan, that was my first piece of evidence. Now I'm just going to stop there. Any questions about that so far? Taking that's a no, so I'm going to move on. Right, now I'm going to share another, go back to this. Okay, let's talk annotations, because it is my view that a lot of people start freaking out about annotations, and I really don't want you to have to worry about it. So I'm just bringing this up here and we'll get started. Okay. First, what's the point of the annotations? Okay, the purpose of each annotation is to explain how and why selected evidence shows that your teaching practice meets the standard descriptors. Okay. The purpose is to be able to basically say, why have you chosen this? Okay, annotations should provide the context for the evidence in order to situate the work, such as the what, who, why, and when. Okay, fairly straightforward. Annotations should identify and explain how the evidence meets the specific standard descriptors. Annotation should articulate the impact on student learning relevant to the standard descriptor. Now, the reason why I have put student learning in italics and underlined it is one of the most common ways for a report to be rejected is when a teacher is only talking about what they did. So when a teacher is saying, I did this, I did that. You have to understand your annotation should be able to demonstrate how this helped the students. How did it help the students achieve the learning outcome that you wanted? Okay, you can talk about the things you did, but you also have to talk about how this helped the students, because at the end of the day, that's what we have to demonstrate. We have to be able to say, the student was able to achieve this, this is how we were able to achieve it. That's basically the bare bones of what an annotation should look like, okay, or what the goal of an annotation is. The annotation should provide sufficient detail so the evidence can be understood by others outside the teacher's context. Do not get wordy with your annotations. I know that sometimes in our profession, we like to be academic in our speaking and in our writing, but you have to understand your supervisor is reading this, and if your supervisor is reading this after having taught 8 periods on a Friday, they are not going to be wanting to slog through incredibly densely written annotations. So be kind to yourself, be kind to your supervisor, just write it in a language that is accessible for everybody. Okay. A good tip is to write your annotations in Microsoft Word or a writing program first. This will make editing much easier. The NESA ETAM system, when you go on, will have a box for you to be able to type your annotations. The annotations should be between 300 to 500 words, maybe a little bit more if you can get away from it. The ETAMs, the NESA ETAMs do have a word limit. So you're not going to be able to have, 2,000 words annotation explaining something. That's not going to be possible. So you're going to try and be able to get what you need to say in 300 to 500 words. That way you can just copy and paste it over and then you're done. Okay. Your supervisor will be reading the annotations. Your TAA, your Teaching Accreditation Authority, will have access to the annotations as well. Your supervisor and you should be working together on your annotations, just so that they're kind of looking at your drafts and then they're clearing it off and they're making sure that, this is something they're happy with, or this is something that they're happy to write a report on you. Because what happens is that the supervisor will have to write a report on you having met the 7 standards. They're going to be basing it on the evidence that you provided and the annotations that you've written. So it's always good to have that open dialogue with the annotations to be able to say to your supervisor, I've made a draft with this evidence at 300 to 500 words. Can I flick it over to you via email, or can you have a look at it and tell me what you think? Usually you will find by the 2nd to 3rd annotation that you and your supervisor would have come to a sort of an understanding about how your supervisor wants to read your annotations and how you are to write them. And then you'll be able to just get it done really, really quickly. If you really think about it, if we're looking at the numbers, you're probably you're basically writing between 2,000 and 3,000 words for your whole report. It's not that much. Okay, I'm just gonna just stop that there for a second, and I'm going to show you my report so you can get a bit of an understanding of what an annotation can or should look like. I'm just going to share a screen. This was my annotation for my lesson plan. You may notice that I only really used 2 descriptors for this one, and that was the minimum requirement. Okay, just 2 descriptors from the standard. Okay. The annotation comes to, I think it came to about 523 words, give or take. I'm just going to read it out loud for those who might be unable to see the video but are listening in. The lesson plan demonstrates the achievement of standard descriptors 1.1.2 and 1.5.2, and it utilizes the idea of collaboration and exploration. This is displayed when students need to brainstorm as well as research ideas to what is involved in computer science and how we use computer science in our everyday activities, such as social media, computers to do internet, games, research, etc. Students recorded notes from the PowerPoint to highlight the content and develop student literacy at all levels, since the main terminology was highlighted and would develop their knowledge further into the topic. And that's where I made my link. I put it in brackets 1.1.2. The lesson plan also showed the range of mixed teaching strategies, such as use of visual aids, PowerPoint images, Google Images, to demonstrate the content to be covered. A work booklet was provided, providing hints on how they might research their answers, and note-taking via the PowerPoint presentation, standard 1.5.2. That's the link. I find that the students work quite well when they have a few minutes to copy notes in silence and to be given opportunities to ask questions. After they've completed this, I would then have a brief explanation about the PowerPoint slide and generate any questions and clarifications students have. This would further contribute to their intellectual development as they were able to process information, and the discussion following each slide, and I had a key terminology highlighted on each slide, linked to the standard 1.1.2. Students will then use the Minecraft education program and complete the main lesson activity, which is create a chicken storm using pre-generated code. If I gave that lesson plan and I gave that annotation to a random bloke on the street, I'm fairly confident that they would know what I'm talking about. Now, when it comes to lesson plans and annotations or any piece of evidence, any piece of annotation, your goal is basically to tell a story. You're telling the story of how this evidence and how you use it translates to you as a teacher, okay? It's not meant to be a make or break of your report. It's meant to be you being able to say, this is what I did, this is how it helped the students, this is how I was able to demonstrate that I've met this standard, okay? That I know how the students are, I know the students and I know how they learn. And you may notice that I didn't write too much about ILPs, or I didn't write too much about students that had learning needs, and I did have some of them in my class, is because I felt that by having put in, I had written about sort of the strategies that I used, the PowerPoint, Google Slides, highlighting keywords, things like that. My supervisor was able to read that and he just picked it up and he said, oh yeah, that was good. You know, you did differentiated strategies. And then that saved me a bit of writing, because remember, your supervisor would have seen a lot of teaching strategies by now. We are not writing as if our supervisors have never seen this before. We have to know our audience a little bit, and we need to, we need to be a little bit kinder on ourselves. You don't need to explain in incredible detail with references to academic literature or anything why you've done something. You're just saying something as simply and as professionally as you can. And that's pretty much the annotations for the first one. What I'm going to be doing is I'll actually be giving you guys access to my whole report, so then you can get a look at it and get a bit of an idea of how I did it and how you might end up writing yours. I'm going to keep this up on the screen. Does anyone have any questions? Another drink of water while I wait. Just waiting to see if there's any questions. Okay, so from Chloe, this is my plan to do another PDP with the different student goals. Okay, that's good. That's a good plan. So labeling annotation of the evidence is not required. Not really. You can do it if you want to guide your supervisor through what they're seeing or what they're looking at. When I was looking at the rules on how this is actually done, it doesn't explicitly say that you need to annotate the evidence itself. I couldn't find anything there to back that up. I could be wrong. So to save yourself a little bit of time, you don't have to annotate the evidence itself. So long as you're able to say in the annotations what that evidence was or what it is that you were trying to do. The other thing about the evidence that you have to think of is how you're going to load it up. So what happens is that you get an evidence box on the NESA ETAMs, and you have a limit. You can only upload, I think it's 10 megabytes. So that means what you'll be doing is whatever it is, you'll be uploading a PDF or you'll be uploading an image. My suggestion to you, if you really do want to annotate, if you're really like gung-ho, I want to annotate my evidence so that my supervisor know what it is. If you know how to do it on the computer, fantastic, go ahead, save it as a PDF and load it up. If you're not good with computers, but you do have some evidence that you do want to annotate, what you can do is have that evidence on a piece of paper or something, get a pen, write out everything that you need, scan it, upload that as a PDF, and it'll achieve the same goals. What you want to do with any evidence that you're loading up is you basically want to think about have I addressed everything that this evidence does in my annotations already? Because if you can do that, you don't need to add more work to your plate. You can just simply say, my annotations are pretty self-explanatory, and then we can get on with it. Any other questions? No worries, Isabella, you're welcome. Yeah. So what you want to do is go to your supervisor first with whatever evidence that you've got, and you say, hey, look, I want to use this piece of evidence. I'm going to write my annotations, or I have written my annotations, about 300 or 500 words. Get your supervisor to have a look at it. It'll probably be a 5-minute discussion where they'll have a look at it, they'll read the annotation, they'll go, yeah, that's good enough, hand it back to you, and then get on with their day. If a supervisor has an issue with the evidence, it's important to note that your supervisor's goal is to actually supervise you and to show you what it is that they expect of you as a teacher. If a supervisor comes back to you and they've got feedback, or they're not happy with the evidence you've chosen, or they're not happy with your annotations, this is not an end of the world scenario. Think of it as a professional dialogue that you're having, where your supervisor will go, yep, okay, that's good, upload it. No, I want some changes, and you just go with that. My suggestion would be, once you have been assigned a supervisor, talk to them about your goals and how you plan to achieve all of this. Have a look at the evidence guide that I put up. If you decide that you've gone through the evidence guide and you've got your evidence and you've decided to write your annotations, you can give that to your supervisor first thing, okay? Your supervisor has to write a report on you. So the goal is to be able to do everything you can to be able to get on your supervisor's good side about your report. And that means having that open discourse and saying, okay, this is a piece of evidence I'm planning to use. This is my annotation. What's your thoughts on this? Thumbs up, thumbs down, could be improved, and then move on. You don't want to make your supervisor's job any harder than it already is, because their report that they write on you is actually longer than the writing you do on your report. They're expected to write between 500 to 800 words plus on you and your report. So they've got a lot of writing. So they've got to do nearly 5,000 words on you. So anything you can do that makes their job a lot easier will make your life a lot easier. Does that make sense, Maria? So Chloe's just got another question. Can I submit my evidence using 2 signed PDPs with lesson plans and observation for my supervisor? Why 2? Why 2 would be my question. Because unless you've got 2 where one identified an issue and the second one was you addressing that issue, meeting different standards, I would say no. I would say that the best thing to do is that each piece of evidence that you have is different from the other. Okay? Because if you're just simply, I won't say recycling, but if you're simply doing like the same thing over and over again, but with different standards, you're not really demonstrating your range as a teacher. Now, I know the PDP would actually, be showing you as a teacher demonstrating certain goals that you have. But the goal of the Proficient report is meant to show the wide range of stuff that you've been able to do. I have seen some people who've done like a 1 theme idea where they've just submitted like 7 lesson plans with seven different descriptors. And a supervisor signed it off, but the TAA rejected it. And the TAA said, well, this is just lesson plans. You're not showing me all the other stuff that you do as a teacher. So my suggestion to you would be to only use 1 of the lesson plan and PDPs. Okay. With the observation report, and this is for everybody, NESA has a very specific template that they use for observation reports that has to be used for this report. It should be listed on the guide that I've sent you. If not, I'll post it up for everybody. But they have a very specific template that they use. And if they do a random audit and they see that there's an observation, but it's not with their template, they tend to ask some very uncomfortable questions to the TAA. So my suggestion to you would be 1 lesson plan with a PDP, and the observation report, you fill it in using the NESA approved observation template. What you do is you do the lesson plan and the PDP as evidence 1, and then you do the observation as part of the evidence upload that you have to do anyway, which is lesson plan. Observation. Now, the good news is that you can actually use the lesson plan. The observation plan. My word's going crazy. You can use your observation as a piece of evidence. Okay. So the way it works is that you do a lesson plan, you get observed, you load up the lesson plan for, say, evidence 1. Then what I did is I actually used my observation to achieve my supervisor lesson report to achieve standard 7. So what I did is I went, right, well, I've already got a lesson plan, so I've done that. And then I looked at the rules, and there's nothing to say that that your observation cannot be used as part of your legislative requirements as a teacher. So you can kind of play around with it a little bit. So my suggestion, lesson plan for evidence 1, observation for evidence 7, standard 7, do the observation report from NESA. Does that make sense? Okay, good. Okay, that's a strategy I would suggest for you. It works for quite a few people, and then that way, look at that. That's 2 pieces of evidence out of the way and a observation, and then you're almost halfway there. one of the things about okay, Maria, what is the observation report? What is the supervisor observing, or is my observation on another teacher's lesson? So the supervisor's observation report is a supervisor observing you in class. That's the bare bones of it. So you will get the observation template from NESA. Let me see if I can actually pull it up now, so then we're all on the same page. Just going to share my screen with you now. Okay, can everybody see this page that I've just pulled up? Thank you, Isabella. Okay, so this is the official observation report that NESA requires. Okay, so that can be used in my evidence for standard 7. This report, yes. Or if you've got an observation report that's already been done, you can use that as evidence 7, standard 7, no problem at all. Now, this one though, this one has to be done by your supervisor. Supervisor puts in your details, you put in the supervisor's details. Now, this is where there's a bit of flexibility, okay? Phase 1 planning, you put in your own stuff, okay? So you're answering those questions, you're writing down what it is that you plan to do, okay? Your supervisor comes in, and what they're doing is they're finding that, all right, whatever it is that you put here, they will then observe you to see if you matched it or if you achieved it, if you did well, if you did badly, and areas for improvement, okay? The observation report is not meant to be a make or break thing, okay? Your supervisor is meant to be giving you feedback on areas that you should be, that they might think you need to improve on. Now, my supervisor was really kind. He observed my lesson and he was pretty happy with it. He's an old school teacher, so he was a little bit, hesitant around the computers, and he made a few comments on my report, but it wasn't anything to be alarmed about. So then what I did is I gave him a lesson plan, not the one I submitted in my report, but a different one. So this is what I'm planning to do. He had a look at it. He was in my class for maybe 40 minutes, 50 minutes. He left in the last 20 minutes. And yeah, he was pretty happy with it. He wrote his notes up, and then he and I sat down and I wrote my reflections. He wrote his reflections. We were both very happy with the outcome, and then we signed and dated it. Now, you have this observation report in your PDP, fantastic. Okay, so Chloe, what I would suggest you do then, this report that you've got, you're gonna include it in evidence 7. Okay, for standard 7. Okay, good. So you make a lesson plan for one. It doesn't have to be linked to this one, but you make a lesson plan, or you have a lesson plan, and you put that as evidence 1, and you link it to the appropriate standards. You then use this one. You use the observation report from NESA, and you're going to include that as evidence 7 for standard 7. Does that make sense? There you go. 2 out of 7 done. Now you just have to annotate them. And then that's 2 out of 7 done. Geez, I'm a wizard. Okay, so did that make sense for everybody? Sorry, we were talking about standard 1 and then suddenly we jumped to standard 7. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions that anyone else might have before we wrap up for today? Isabella asks, is the observation report submitted separately or as well, or just evidence? So what happens is you upload your evidences and they will have a drop box down menu. Okay, so you would put your, you upload your PDF as, you know, meeting a standard, and there's actually a separate box for observation. So what I did is I uploaded my evidence 7 as my to meet standard 7, which was the observation report. And then I also uploaded my observation report, if that makes sense. So I actually uploaded it twice, and the system accepts that. And when I asked my TAA about it, he said, yeah, that's a common thing. So you upload it as a piece of evidence, and then you actually use the drop-down box on the next window, and then you actually upload it as your observation report. Chloe asks, my lesson plan is handwriting and PE. How can I annotate? Okay, so handwriting. So the best thing to do would be to have a look at the descriptors that you plan to use. So try and stay in the descriptors of standard 1 at the moment, maybe standard 2, but standard 1 for now. Get the lesson plan in front of you, all right, put it down, get a pen, and just look through and go hunting. You're basically going hunting. Is there anything I can see from the descriptors that I can see in my lesson plan? Okay, if it is, either highlight it or make a circle or make a note, and then you just write meet standard such and such, did X, Y, and Z to achieve outcome. Okay. If it's with PE, because PE is quite often a very hard lesson plan to do, because you can write a lesson plan, but then a lot of it is unrecorded. A lot of it is, you know, kids doing a physical activity or something. So what you might do is you might be able to have that lesson plan, and then you might actually do the class, and then, you know, get a clipboard or something, and then just sort of write on the clipboard as the lesson is progressing what's happening. So you might have students that are having problems staying organized and how you address that. And then you just write that and write that and write that. When that's all finished, you then just go back and then look at the descriptors again and say, all right, what matches? And that's all you're doing. Your annotations is going to be where you explain everything. If you really want to annotate, you're just basically saying, this is where I want you to look for this. I personally don't think you need to. Your annotations should be able to stand on their own, and your annotations should be able to say, this is what the evidence is trying to do. I only did the annotation on the evidence for evidence 1. Once someone told me you don't have to do that, I just went, that's it, enough. I'm just going to load it up, and then I'm going to write the annotations, and everyone was happy with that. Did I answer your question, Chloe? And if anyone else has any other questions. Have another drink of water. I need to digest. Yeah, no, I've been talking for 1 hour and 10 minutes. I need to digest what I've said too. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to load up this video. If you have any more questions, you can ask me on that thread there, and then I'll continue on. Next week, we'll be looking at standard 2, and from there, we will be talking about, again, the types of evidences that you might want to find and how you might annotate that evidence. If you have any questions about what kind of evidence you want to find or you want to get ahead, please look at the Proficient Teacher Evidence Guide for Casual Teachers. It has everything there, and it has a great section at the end on annotations, which can guide you as well. I do hope you guys have all enjoyed my session today. Thank you for coming. And again, feel free to reach out to me through the group. I'm happy to help you. my goal is hopefully I can get you guys over the line, get you to Proficient, and hopefully get you paid a little bit with that pay bump. All right, I'm going to stop recording now. Have a good time, guys.